I never thought a single subway ride could flip my entire day upside down, but here we are. So, picture this. I'm on the downtown 6 train during the evening rush, crammed like everyone else into that steel tube buzzing with tired commuters and the faint smell of old coffee mixed with subway sweat. I'm just trying to get home after a draining day at work, headphones in, zoning out, you know how it goes. Then, out of nowhere, this guy slides onto the train and stands right next to me. What caught me wasn't just that he was good looking, which he absolutely was in this casually effortless way, but that he had this kind of energy, like he didn't quite belong in the usual commuter chaos. His eyes caught mine briefly, and he gave me this half smile, like he was about to say something but wasn't sure if he should. I shrugged internally and went back to my music, assuming that was that, but then he actually started talking. Not loudly, just enough for me to hear over the rumble. He mentioned something about the train being unusually packed tonight and joked about how the city never slows down, no matter how late it gets. I was half listening, expecting the usual small talk, when I realized he had a sort of easy confidence, like he'd spent a lot of time people watching just to find the right moment to connect. His name, I learned quickly, was Marcus. We got to chatting. Well, I mostly answered because honestly, I was a little caught off guard, but also curious. Marcus was in town visiting for a conference, said he liked this city's organized chaos, and was trying to soak it all in before heading back home. There was something about him that felt genuine, not forced or rehearsed like some random subway encounter. He wasn't just killing time, he seemed genuinely interested in whoever was standing next to him, and that happened to be me. When my stop came, I figured that was it. I said goodbye, stepped onto the platform, and started walking toward the exit, thinking about how weirdly refreshing that conversation had been. But then, as I was turning down the corridor toward the station's bathroom, because, well, after a day like that I desperately needed a quick pit stop, I heard footsteps behind me. I glanced back. Marcus was right there, following me. At first, I thought maybe he needed the bathroom too, and just happened to be going the same way. But there was a slight hesitation in the way he moved, like he was deciding whether to keep following or back off. Instead of turning away, he caught my eye again, that same half smile from the train still there, but now it felt charged with something else. A mix of anticipation and maybe, just maybe, a little boldness. I don't know what made me let him come in with me. Maybe it was the way he looked like a stranger who somehow didn't feel like one anymore. Or maybe it was just that rare moment when you decide to roll the dice on a complete stranger because, let's be honest, life's too short for what-ifs. So yeah, that's where this all started. 2 strangers on a train, and then a bathroom that suddenly didn't feel so private anymore. And somehow, I had this feeling I wasn't just gonna wash my hands and walk out alone. So Marcus stepped into the bathroom behind me, and for a second, I just stood there, hand halfway to the faucet, wondering what the hell was happening. I mean, who follows someone to the bathroom in a public subway station? But there he was, leaning casually against the wall near the sinks, looking way too relaxed for a guy in a cramped, tiled space that smelled like bleach and damp concrete. "Sorry if that's weird," he said, glancing over with that same half smile. You seemed like someone I wanted to talk to more." I blinked, trying to figure out if I should laugh it off or tell him to scram. But honestly, at that moment, I felt this weird mix of curiosity and something else. Like maybe I was just as tired of the usual small talk and awkward silences as he was. No, it's okay," I said, finally turning on the tap. "I don't usually get followed to the bathroom, though." He chuckled, a low sound that made the echo bounce around the tiles. "Yeah, I'm guessing neither do I. But hey, sometimes you just have to take a chance." There was something about the way he said that, like he wasn't just talking about a random subway encounter, but something bigger, something maybe even personal. I dried my hands and looked over at him, trying to read whatever was behind those eyes. They weren't just charming, they had a kind of depth that made me want to listen. "So what's your story?" I asked, half joking, half serious. "Besides being the kind of guy who follows strangers to the bathroom." Marcus smiled wider now, a genuine smile that softened his features. "Fair enough. Well, I'm Marcus. I'm from Chicago, here for a tech conference. Honestly, I'm kind of a please-mere for people watching and random conversations. Feels like the city's full of stories, you know?" I nodded. Yeah, I get that. I live here, work in marketing a few blocks from this mess. My days are usually the same. Work, subway, maybe a drink if I'm feeling fancy. He stepped a little closer, the sound of his voice filling the small space between us. And what about tonight? This isn't your usual subway ride, is it? No, definitely not, I admitted. I was just looking forward to getting home and crashing. But then you happened. Marcus laughed softly. Glad I could ruin your plans. We both smiled, and just like that, the awkwardness started to melt away. I found myself wanting to know more about him, and maybe in some weird way he wanted the same. Then, like a sudden jolt back to reality, the bathroom door swung open and a woman glanced inside, giving us a quick, confused look before heading to one of the stalls. We both froze for a second, caught in that weird moment of, what do we do now? The bathroom was tiny and echoey, not exactly made for private conversations. Marcus cleared his throat. Maybe we should get out of here. I agreed immediately. Yeah, this is kind of a weird place for a first date. He laughed, and as we walked out together, I realized I barely knew his phone number or anything more than his name and where he was from. But somehow it felt like that could come later. Outside, the station was chaos again, people rushing by, announcements overhead, the usual clatter of trains arriving. But for a few seconds, standing there with Marcus beside me, it felt like the city noise dimmed just a bit. Do you want to grab a coffee? He asked, already knowing the answer. I smiled. Yeah, I think I'd like that. We found a place nearby, one of those little 24-hour spots with flickering neon signs and too strong espresso. We grabbed 2 cups and found a corner booth that was way too small for the 2 of us to sit apart. We talked about everything and nothing, about how he hated conference dinners, how I secretly wanted to be an artist but ended up in marketing, about the terrible TV shows we both pretended to hate but binged anyway. There was a rhythm to it, like we were filling in parts of each other's lives that neither of us had expected to share with a stranger on a Tuesday night. At some point, Marcus reached across the table and just lightly brushed his fingers against mine. It was almost imperceptible, but enough to send a jolt through me. I caught his eye, and he gave me that same half smile, the one that said, I'm here, I see you. And honestly, I saw him too. Not just the stranger from the train or the guy who'd followed me into a bathroom. I saw someone who might actually matter. That night, as we finally left the coffee shop and stepped back into the city's hum, I realized that sometimes the weirdest moments turn out to be the ones you remember forever. And whatever this was between me and Marcus, it was just getting started. As we stepped out into the chilly night, the city felt different somehow. Not just the usual buzz of traffic and distant sirens, but this quiet bubble wrapped around us, like we'd carved out a little corner just for the 2 of us. I was surprised how easy it felt to be with Marcus. The kind of easy where time slows down because the conversation doesn't have to be forced. It just flows. We wandered a bit, aimless really, just moving with the rhythm of the street. I pointed out a few spots I liked. The tiny bookstore that stayed open late, the graffiti wall that somehow never got cleaned up, the old diner that made the best pancakes on the weekend. Marcus listened like he was filing everything away, maybe planning some future visit where he wouldn't have to rush back to a conference. At one point, we ducked into a quiet park with those tall trees casting long shadows under the street lamps. The city noise softened, and for a moment, it felt like we were the only 2 people left in the world. I found myself noticing the little things, how Marcus's eyes caught the light, how his breath formed tiny clouds in the air, how his hand brushed against mine as we walked. I didn't expect tonight to turn out like this, I said, breaking the comfortable silence. He smiled that same half grin, the one that could make you feel like he was holding a secret just for you. Neither did I. Guess sometimes you have to follow the weird moments, even if it means following someone to the bathroom. I laughed, shaking my head. You're ridiculous. Maybe, he admitted, but if being ridiculous means I get to know you, I'll take it. We stopped by a bench and he sat down, patting the spot next to him. I hesitated for a second, that old nervous part of me creeping in, but then I sat, feeling the cold metal under me and the warmth of his presence right beside. So seriously, I said, what's the deal with the conference? You're here for tech stuff, right? What's your day actually like? Marcus shrugged. Boring mostly. Sitting in endless meetings, trying to sound interested while secretly scrolling through my phone. The fun part is meeting people, random conversations, new perspectives. I nodded. Sounds like my kind of conference. Except I'm usually the one getting stuck in meetings and pretending to be interested. He laughed softly. Maybe that's why we clicked. We both know how to fake it. There was a pause, and then he looked at me, eyes steady. What about you? What do you want, really? Not the marketing job, not the small talk. The question caught me off guard. I looked away for a moment, thinking, honestly, I don't know. I guess I want something real. Something that doesn't feel like just going through the motions. Marcus nodded, like he understood perfectly. Me too. We sat there on that cold bench, two people who barely knew each other, but somehow felt like they'd been waiting to meet. The city around us hummed and glowed, but it felt distant now. Suddenly, his hand found mine again, fingers intertwining with a sort of tentative certainty. My heart sped up, but I didn't pull away. Instead, I squeezed his hand back, the warmth spreading through my chest. Do you want to go somewhere else? Marcus asked quietly. I thought about my apartment, empty and quiet, waiting for me to collapse into it. But right now, the idea of being alone didn't seem as appealing. Yeah, I'd like that. We walked together toward the subway, catching the last train back uptown. The ride was quieter this time, mostly shared smiles and the occasional glance. When we got off near my place, Marcus hesitated. Mind if I come up for a bit? Just so we can keep talking? I swallowed the nervous lump in my throat. I'd like that. Back in my apartment, the city lights filtered through the window, casting soft patterns on the floor. We moved to the couch, settling close enough that our legs brushed. The conversation picked up again, this time more personal, more honest. We talked about family, fears, dreams we kept tucked away. It felt like peeling back layers, and every word made me feel like I was seeing something real and rare. At one point, Marcus reached up, brushing a stray hair from my forehead. His touch sent a shiver down my spine, and I realized I was holding my breath. When our eyes met, there was a silent question hanging between us. I leaned in just a little, and he met me halfway. Our lips touched softly at first, testing, then with a growing confidence. It wasn't rushed or desperate, just two people discovering something new and fragile. Afterward, we stayed close, just holding each other, the quiet of the night wrapping around us. I felt something I hadn't in a long time, hope. Maybe this strange night, starting with a subway ride and a bathroom follow, was the beginning of something worth holding on to. As we finally parted hours later, promising to talk the next day, I realized that sometimes the weirdest moments lead you exactly where you need to be. And with Marcus, I was ready to see where this could go. The next morning, I woke up with the faint sunlight sneaking through my blinds and the lingering warmth where Marcus had been lying beside me. The apartment felt quieter than usual, but not empty, more like paused, waiting for whatever came next. I rolled over, checked my phone, and there it was. A message from Marcus. Simple, but enough to make me smile. Morning. Coffee later? I wasn't sure what I expected. Maybe a casual text, maybe nothing at all. But seeing his name there felt like this little thread connecting the weird subway night to the real world. I typed back, definitely. What time? He replied almost immediately. How about 2? I want to hear more about your secret artist ambitions. I laughed quietly to myself. Secret artist ambitions. That felt right. There was something about Marcus that made it easy to open up, even the parts of me I usually kept locked away. The day stretched out long and slow, and I found myself thinking about last night more than I wanted to admit. The way his hand felt in mine, the way his eyes held mine like I mattered. It was weird, because I wasn't usually the kind of guy who got swept up in moments like this, but with Marcus, it felt natural. By the time 2 p.m. rolled around, I was waiting outside that same coffee shop we'd stumbled into the night before. The place was just as quiet during the afternoon lull, and I spotted Marcus almost instantly. He was already there, scrolling on his phone, looking effortlessly casual in a simple shirt and jeans. When he saw me, his face lit up in that way that made me forget how nervous I was. Hey, he greeted as I sat down. Hey, I replied, feeling my cheeks warm. We ordered drinks again, settled into the same cramped booth, and started talking. This time, the conversation dove deeper. Marcus told me about his family back in Chicago, about his younger brother, a kid who always seemed to be a step ahead of him, and his mom's obsession with gardening. I shared stories about growing up in this city, about my parents, divorce, about the nights I spent sketching in my journal instead of going out. It was strange how quickly we slipped into this rhythm, like friends who'd known each other for years. I realized I was starting to look forward to these moments, to the way his voice sounded when he laughed, to the way his eyes sparkled whenever he talked about something he cared about. After a while, Marcus's expression shifted, a little more serious. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure." "Are you seeing anyone? Or, dating?" I took a sip of my coffee, feeling a flutter in my stomach. "No, not really. I mean, I've tried, but it never feels right. It's like I'm waiting for something, but I don't know what." He nodded thoughtfully. "Yeah, I get that. I've been out here chasing this career thing for years, but I never really thought about who I was doing it for. Or if I was even happy." There was a beat, and then he reached across the table, lightly touching my hand again. "Maybe we're both waiting for the same thing." My heart skipped, and I looked away, suddenly shy. Maybe. The afternoon slipped by faster than I'd expected, and before we knew it, the sun was dipping low, casting warm golden light across the street. We decided to take a walk, not wanting the day to end just yet. As we strolled along the sidewalk, the city around us buzzed with life. People heading home, street vendors packing up, the distant hum of traffic blending with occasional laughter from nearby cafes. Marcus suddenly stopped and looked at me, his eyes searching. "Do you want to grab dinner? I know a place nearby. It's nothing fancy, but it's good." I hesitated for just a second before nodding. "Yeah, I'd like that." The restaurant was small and cozy, dimly lit with flickering candles on each table. We sat close across from each other, menus forgotten as we talked about everything and nothing, our favorite movies, childhood memories, embarrassing moments we barely admitted to ourselves. It was comfortable, the kind of conversation that makes you forget the world exists outside that little bubble. At one point, Marcus reached out again, this time sliding his hand over mine with a gentle squeeze. I caught his gaze and he smiled, a quiet, content smile that made my chest feel tight in the best way. "I'm really glad I followed you that night," he said softly. "Me too," I admitted, the words feeling both simple and powerful. After dinner, we walked back toward the subway station, reluctant to say goodbye. The streetlights formed pools of soft yellow light on the pavement, and the cool evening air was crisp against my skin. Marcus stopped and looked at me, his expression open and a little nervous. "I don't want this to be just a one-time thing," he said honestly. "Neither do I." I replied without hesitation. He smiled, that same half grin that had drawn me in from the start, and reached up to brush my hair back from my forehead. The touch was tender, and I leaned into it, feeling the warmth spread through me. We stood there for a moment longer before he pulled me into a gentle kiss. It wasn't rushed or desperate. It was steady and sure, like an unspoken promise. When we finally parted, he rested his forehead against mine. "So, same time tomorrow?" I laughed softly. "Definitely." As I watched him disappear into the subway entrance, I realized that night had begun as a random commute home, but was turning into something I never expected. Something real, something worth holding on to. And for the first time in a long time, I was excited to see where it would go. The next day crawled by in this weird mix of nervous anticipation and casual distraction. I caught myself glancing at my phone way more than usual, waiting for a text or a call from Marcus, or just thinking about what we'd say next. How this could all work. It felt like the whole city was moving around me, but I was stuck in this bubble that was only about him and me. When 7 p.m. rolled around, I headed toward the little jazz club Marcus had mentioned earlier that day. It was one of those tucked-away spots with a faded neon sign and a door that looked like it hadn't been painted in decades. But once inside, the place was warm and buzzing with music and low conversations. I could already hear the saxophone from the street. Marcus was sitting at the bar when I walked in, looking casual but sharp in a dark jacket that somehow made him look even more him. He smiled when he saw me, and my stomach did that stupid flip it always did. "Hey," he said, sliding over a stool. "Hey," I replied, settling in next to him. The night unfolded with that easy rhythm we'd gotten used to, the music weaving through our conversation as we talked about everything from bad dates to favorite albums to the weird quirks of the city. The band played with this smoky intensity that pulled everyone in, and somewhere between a shared laugh and a quiet moment watching the sax player close his eyes, I realized how much I wanted to keep finding moments like this with Marcus. After a couple of drinks, Marcus leaned toward me, his voice low. I wasn't sure about this trip, but meeting you has made it different, better. I nodded, feeling my face warm. Yeah, same here. There was a pause, and then he reached out, fingers brushing against mine again. That simple touch had become this quiet language between us, saying all the things we didn't say out loud yet. Can I be honest? He asked. Always. I'm scared, he admitted, voice barely above a whisper. Of getting attached, of leaving, of messing this up. I squeezed his hand gently. Me too, but maybe that's what makes it worth it. He looked at me then, eyes shining with something like hope and vulnerability. I want to try, if you want to. I swallowed the lump in my throat. I want that too. We sat there for a while longer, the music wrapping around us like a warm blanket. When the band finally took a break, Marcus pulled me closer, resting his forehead against mine. I'm glad I followed you to the bathroom, he said with a soft laugh. I smiled, the memory flashing in my mind, the crowded subway, the awkwardness, the unexpected moment that somehow started it all. Me too. Best decision I didn't plan to make. Later, as we walked back through the city streets, the night air was crisp, and the world felt wide and full of possibilities. Marcus slipped his hand into mine, and I felt that quiet certainty again, the feeling that maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of something real. Before he left at the subway entrance, he paused and looked at me seriously. Text me when you get home. I will. We shared one last kiss before he disappeared into the train, the doors sliding shut behind him. Standing there, I felt a mix of excitement and nervousness, but mostly a gratitude for the strange, unexpected way strangers can suddenly become something more. That night, as I lay in bed, my phone buzzed softly. It was Marcus. Good night, the message said. Just those 2 words, but I smiled like an idiot. I typed back, good night, see you tomorrow. And with that, I finally let myself believe that maybe, sometimes, strangers on a train really could change your life. The days that followed felt like I was walking through a dream I didn't want to wake up from. Every text from Marcus was like a little spark, breaking up the monotony of my regular routine. We messaged about everything and nothing. Memes, music, random thoughts at odd hours, and those tiny threads started weaving us closer together. We settled into this rhythm of seeing each other whenever Marcus wasn't buried in conference stuff or jet-lagged from traveling. Sometimes it was an impromptu lunch, other times a late-night walk through the city, just talking and laughing until our voices got hoarse. The more time we spent together, the more I realized how rare this kind of connection was, like finding someone who sees you without all the masks you usually wear. One Friday evening, after a long week of work that had left me drained and disconnected, Marcus invited me over to his hotel suite. It was modest but cozy, with a large window overlooking the city skyline, the lights twinkling like stars below. I remember thinking how surreal it was to be here, sitting beside him, feeling like this was the place I was supposed to be. We made dinner together. Well, Marcus mostly cooked while I chopped veggies and tried not to mess up. The kitchen was small, and we bumped into each other a few times, laughing when we did. It felt real, simple, and honest. Afterward, we moved to the couch with glasses of cheap wine and a playlist that Marcus swore was underrated indie gems. As the night deepened, so did our conversation. Marcus shared stories about his childhood, the pressure to always be the, quote, successful one, and how he'd spent years chasing a career that felt less like passion and more like obligation. I talked about my own struggles with self-doubt, the fear of never quite measuring up, and how art had always been my quiet rebellion against that. There was a moment when we just looked at each other, a kind of understanding passing between us that didn't need words. The weight of everything we'd said hung in the air, but instead of feeling heavy, it was freeing. He reached out, fingers tracing the line of my jaw, and I leaned into the touch. Our kiss started slow, tentative, but quickly grew more urgent. like we were trying to close the distance that time and circumstance had built between us. Later, wrapped up in a messy tangle of limbs and whispered confessions, I realized something. This wasn't just a fling or a fleeting spark. This was something deeper, something worth fighting for. The days that followed were a blur of stolen moments. Morning coffees shared over text, surprise visits after work, lazy Sundays where we did nothing but talk and dream. Marcus had to leave soon, his trip coming to an end, and the thought of that hanging over us was this low thrum of anxiety I couldn't shake. One night, as we walked through the park near my apartment, the city lights shimmering on the wet pavement after a light rain, Marcus stopped and took my hands in his. "I don't want this to end," he said quietly. "Neither do I," I replied, squeezing his hands. He looked at me, eyes shining with a mix of hope and fear. "What if we tried long distance? I know it's not ideal, but you feel like something I want to keep." My heart pounded. The idea of him leaving was terrifying, but the thought of losing what we had felt even worse. "I'd try," I said honestly. "If you would." He smiled then, that full, genuine smile that made everything feel possible. "I would." We stood there for a moment longer, holding on to each other as the city breathed around us. It wasn't perfect, and it wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Sometimes, all it takes is the courage to follow a stranger onto a train, and maybe even into a bathroom, to find the kind of love that changes everything. The day Marcus was supposed to leave arrived with that familiar mix of excitement and dread. We spent the morning wandering through our favorite neighborhood spots, grabbing a late breakfast at that little cafe where the barista always spelled my name wrong, browsing through vinyl records at the shop he said reminded him of home, and sitting on a bench in the park where the city felt quieter, as if it was giving us a moment to breathe. Neither of us said much about the impending goodbye, but it was there in the space between words, in the way our fingers lingered when we touched, and in the softness of his eyes when they found mine. At the airport, the world felt suddenly too big and too small all at once. We stood close, the noise and bustle around us fading into a blur. He reached up, tucking a stray hair behind my ear, and I felt the warmth of that gesture settle deep inside me. "I'm really gonna miss this," Marcus said quietly. "Me too," I admitted, swallowing the lump in my throat. He smiled, that same half grin that had first caught my attention on the subway, and kissed me, gentle, sure, and full of the promise that this was just the beginning, not an end. Before he walked away, he pressed a folded piece of paper into my hand. "For when you need a reminder," he said. I unfolded it later, back home, to find a small sketch Marcus had made of us sitting on that park bench, framed by the city skyline. It was simple but perfect, capturing a moment that felt like ours alone. Over the next few months, we navigated the tricky dance of long distance, late-night calls, surprise visits, and endless texts filled with everyday details and quiet confessions. It wasn't always easy. There were moments of frustration and loneliness, but the foundation we'd built made those moments feel temporary, just bumps in the road we were willing to take together. One evening, as I sat by the window watching the city lights flicker on, my phone buzzed. A message from Marcus. "Book a flight. I think it's time." My heart raced as I read it over and over. A few weeks later, Marcus was back, standing in my apartment doorway with that familiar smile, suitcase in hand, and something new in his eyes. A readiness to build something lasting. We didn't have all the answers, and we knew the future would come with its own challenges. But for the first time in a long time, I felt grounded, hopeful, and certain that sometimes the most unexpected encounters, like a stranger following you to the bathroom on a subway train, can lead to the kind of love that changes everything. And honestly, I wouldn't change a thing